Hello students, this is Dr. Smita Yogesh Zadav and I am the Trustee and Executive Director of Dr. D.Y. Patil Vidyapeeth Society. It's wonderful to meet you all here at the next Saturday Brainwave series. And today with us we have Mr. Indraneel Chitle from Mr. Chitre Bandhu. You'll have heard the famous brand. As you all know that growth is never by chance. It is the result of forces working together. With this quote, I would like to introduce Mr. Indraneel Chitle. This dynamic young partner of the Chitre Group has taken Chitre Group to newer heights. From merely 10,000 stores where Chitre products was distributed, it has gone up to 3 lakh new stores. And the growth has been absolutely vertical. And the success of this is because of Mr. Indraneel Chitre, who's sitting with us here. Welcome, sir.
Thank you. It's a pleasure being here.
Absolutely. And I'm sure our students of MBA and BBA are really going to benefit from your words.
I'm glad. I think this is something that we should be doing for the next bunch of students because they are going to be shaping the country ahead.
Absolutely. Absolutely, sir. So, to begin with, can you give us a little idea about what the family business is about and how your organizational structure about Chitre Bandhu is about?
So the family business was started by my great grandfather, late B.G. Chitre, back in the year 1939. So we are a 82-year-old family business. I am a 4th generation partner. So when the business started, it was a B2B business and it started in a village called Bhilavdi in Sangli district. And with the help of the British Railways at that time, we used to send milk products from Bhilavdi to Mumbai and supply it to different retailers in Mumbai who would sell it under their brand name. This was in the era which was before telephony or internet or television, etc. So keeping a control on what was happening in the market from a remote village which was about 500 kilometers away was becoming difficult. So what my great grandfather realized was that probably we need some better controls, and he asked his elder son to come and join the business and start looking after the Mumbai operations. What he realized after coming there was that majorly because being a B2B business, and at that time when quality enforcement measures were not really well defined, we were often being cheated by the brands that were selling our product, and while they would be making money out of it, we would not be getting anything out of it because we did not know what was happening. And keeping controls was very difficult. So, and the other big factor what they realized was that Mumbai at that time was a very expensive place to do business and a floating market. So the population there was not stable. People would not live in Mumbai because it was expensive. And then for a business like milk, which is a daily commodity that's consumed, it was only the restaurant industry that was consuming that, and that was not a good paymaster. So they realized that, and that was around the same time my grandfather as well joined the business, and they realized that why don't we shift to a stable market like Pune, which was at since then known as an educational hub, and that's why it had a stable population, not a floating population, relatively cheaper place to do business, and consumption pattern was good. And that is how Pune became a market for us, and we still continued doing B2B business for some time. And it was only about 6-7 years later that we started doing business on our own. And when that was the era, milk used to come in glass bottles. And there was no process which was used to enhance the shelf life of the milk, which is like pasteurization or homogenization or standardization, which we now see today. So what do you do about the excess milk? Because when we formed the brand, we did not have a ready market from day one. So that is when they realized that making khoa or mawa, as we say in India, was the best way. And then if you're making mawa and khoa, why not make mithai out of it? And that is how the mithai business came into existence. And that was around the same time when the 2 younger brothers of my grandfather as well joined the business. And since they were 4 brothers working together, that is how the Chitre Bandhu or Chitre Brothers as a business was formed back then.
This was approximately 1960s?
No, this was about 1946, 47.
Independence.
Just pre-independence, around independence.
Right.
And Chitre Bandhu as a brand was actually formed in 1950.
Okay.
Just post-independence when we actually became a republic. And I think things started progressing gradually where we had 2 lines of businesses, where one was the store business where we were selling products, and one was the milk business where we were selling a commodity, because it has been a commodity and a regulated commodity since that time, because there are farmers involved, there are cooperatives involved, there's government regulation involved because it is an essential service. So that way both these have very different chains of profitability, very different chains of inventory turnaround, and the reflection of it together was how the business kept thriving. So whatever profits we were generating from better, profit heavy business like products was being invested into building capacity at the dairy side, and gradually both things started expanding.
Okay.
It was around 1970 when when my father's generation had also started joining the business. We found the product called Bakarwadi. And after that things just changed because we also started doing namkeens, and namkeens as a product is consumed much more widely than mithai is, because mithai preferences change from say 100 miles is what was the saying back then.
Okay.
So the same motichur laddu that you get in Chandigarh versus what you call motichur laddu in Bangalore, the name is the same, the ingredients are the same, but the texture is different.
Absolutely.
So you can't really have a universal appeal to that, which namkeens did. And around late 80s is when we started franchising.
Okay.
And we did about 12-15 franchises, which as of now stand at about 60, which are spread across Maharashtra. And in the early 2000s is when my generation, my elder cousin Kedar joined the business as well, and eventually I joined in 2011. And we started focusing more onto the distribution chain business, where moving out from our stores and actually packaging it, selling it at different locations was what we tried to focus on. Because the idea at that time was that we realized people were getting busier, and convenience was of more value than branded experiences. So if you were able to build a brand and make it appealing at multiple avenues like a supermarket or a kirana store or a mom and pop store, amongst the basket of products that a consumer would be buying, you have to make space there. Right. And that is what we tried focusing on, and as of now, and that's around the same time when we started exporting also heavily. So we now actually sell our product in almost all parts of the country, every continent on the planet, and that way we have 3 generations still active in the business in multiple roles.
Right.
And we still continue to operate together as a family.
Yeah, but you have an impressive market share, and with the growth that you have given to the company, it is very impressive. So there's another question which comes up with it. How do you manage the production, and how did you grow the production line along with the demand?
So I would say that we have too many engineers at our end inside the family. I think amongst the 13 partners that we have active, 7 would be engineers. So that's more than 50%.
Okay.
We always focus more on building that infrastructure towards giving that quality to the consumer. So if you want to give the consumer the same quality and the experience, then we have to control the manufacturing. And that is where the energy started, that if certain things are human dependent or person dependent, we need to automate those. If we have automated those, we need to scale those. And also while doing that, we need to ensure that the safety to the consumer while building those products is at the highest level, and compliance is at a global standard, like say ISO 22000 or FSMS 22000. So we've always had a orientation towards adopting technology, modifying them to suit our purpose, and actually building scale fast. So that's how I think it's generational that we were able to inherit, and we just got to speed it up faster when we joined.
Right. So basically you're a BTech in electronics, right?
Yeah.
And as you rightly put it, technology is the key and innovation is the key to everything. So how do you innovate? What are the methodologies that you use? Because it's very challenging. You have different brands happening, but there are new technologies coming up in the market.
So what we've seen is that while automating things is relatively the easiest part, because it's a very defined problem statement. You can put in your R&D engineers, you can put in your own brain power, you can put in your traditional people also to understand and determine what's to be done. The biggest problem or issue we face with automation is the lack of standardization. So one of the most important thing that we've tried to do is standardize each and every process, each and every raw material, each and every SOP, and each and every process flow that actually determines what a raw material enters the factory to the point where it reaches as a final product to the consumer at any part of the world. So to the point where we will be using cloud computing to know data about the animals that are actually supplying milk to our factory, or we will be doing contract farming with selective breeds of chilies or coriander to ensure that the spice level in the bakarwadi or the chiguda is always going to be the same throughout the year. So this obsession of controlling the raw material is something that we focus heavily on, and that is where the quality teams are also built on. And we work very closely with our vendors, where rather than being vendors, we now treat them as auxiliary units, where their sole job is to supply what we demand in that selective format. But with that, what we are able to ensure is that we give them continual growth, so they don't need to look outside for market.
Right.
So when all of this is controlled and it's funneled into a channel that comes into your factory, many things usually that can go wrong are prevented. So then the automation takes care of itself, that if everything is standardized, it will do its job.
True.
And then the packaging and the innovation comes after that, where whatever you've produced, you can package, and then with packaging you can actually reach every corner of the world.
Right.
So then we've been able to build in the technology for having the predictive analysis, having the AI of knowledge of what our distributors are going to do in the coming week, and actually linking our production to that, because since we are making food, there is a shelf life. So consumers buy whatever is the freshest. So we have to ensure that whatever is there on the rack of a store is going to be the freshest possible. So the shortest time from the factory to the store is going to be the challenge for supply chain. And that is where we build in a lot of machine learning, AI, and actually control the supply chain to an extent that this cycle of procurement to purchase is something that is squeezed to the shortest possible time.
Right.
And that ensures consumers are happy.
Okay. So for this, the basic problem with the raw material, do you go in for contract farming?
Yeah, we do.
You all do it. Okay.
So we've been doing that for the last 7-8 years now, where we started with green chilies, then we eventually moved on to red chili as well, then we moved on to coriander, which are all fresh produces.
Right.
And their taste and their texture and their moisture varies as per the season. So especially during the rainy season, that's a big problem, because they come in damp, and while the weight comes in very high, the flavor is lost. So that leads to a direct change in our recipe or a consumption pattern, or a dissatisfied customer because they are not happy with the taste.
True.
So to overcome this, we started working on this, and we hired a team that was doing this for other multinationals, and we were able to replicate that model in India.
But that's wonderful, because as you all know that farming in India is never a very profitable making business for the farmers, and you see the number of suicide cases that are happening. Because of contract farming, they are benefited of secured revenue, and that's very important. I'm sure you all are doing a very justifying the social cause out of it. It's very nice.
So actually, so we've had the agriculture commissioner and I come and actually see how those contract farming was being implemented, and talk to the farmers who do this for us. So they have actually seen that the lack of reason to go to the market because of a fixed buying pattern is actually helping them hedge better and plant better, because they are more sure about where they are able to sell this.
True.
So, and we even factor in the differential pricing, where there is a on-season price, there is a off-season price, and that's why they will always be making better than the market. And while doing that, we are actually getting very well controlled crops. So that's how it's been useful, and that's why I was quite hopeful that the farm laws that were being pushed by the central government should have been implemented. I think there are some restrictions or limitations that should be addressed, because we have a 17% GDP coming in from farming in India.
True.
So I'm hoping that whatever ironing out needs to be done is done, but they are implemented soon, because if the aim is to be the food factory of the world, we need to be growing very efficiently.
True. Let's hope for the best. Let's hope for the best. And especially when we face this pandemic, it is very crucial, because most of the markets got disrupted. And marketing is also one crucial factor where Chitre Bandhu company is concerned. So how did you manage that during the pandemic, COVID pandemic?
So I would say pandemic was a hit and miss, but it was a good realization on where we should be betting our future into. So there were certain sectors which were traditional, where we lost business because those avenues ceased to exist. But while doing that, there were other sectors which we had invested into, hoping for a future or a 5-6 year horizon. All those businesses came much faster, where whatever was a 5-year target was achieved in 2 years.
Achha.
So there was a clear distinction that came out, that where should we be investing as a family, as a business, and in terms of creating value for the next decade. And that made us overcome the setbacks that certain sectors gave us in the business much faster, and we were still able to be in the plus. But while doing that, what we realized is that a conventional avenue of sale has changed. So we have to factor in the fact that e-commerce is playing a very critical role in delivering our product to multiple locations and right into the doorstep of a consumer. Digital marketing is going to be playing a very important role, because we can actually target consumers a lot more efficiently than conventional media can. And while doing that, we need to keep portraying what the brand is actually doing. So that's why transparency became a big factor, where we were actually for the first time in 80 years doing live sessions from our factories, showing what was happening inside, just to improve the consumer confidence about the brand.
Okay.
But when this transparency came, and because of the technology, we were able to reach a lot people faster, and along with that, the conventional advertising medium, where we've been always talking about brand values than product, all of that cumulative effect added up towards making a year which was difficult, but which was ensuring there was growth onto the balance sheet.
Okay.
So I would say if we are able to grow amidst such difficult situation, whatever we are doing is on the right track in terms of whatever we see in the future.
Let's hope for the best. And it has taken a good turn, positive turn, of course, where digital marketing is concerned. It has benefited all of us. But as marketing is concerned, you also export most of your products. Do you find any difference in the domestic market and the international market?
Well, one limitation or difference that we see is the trade regulations. Because there are certain products that we can sell in India because they are traditionally Indian heritage products, but they are not completely understood by the Western countries because they don't have that product range or product preference in their regular food laws. So we have to work heavily onto the policy towards shaping that non-conventional, non-traditional foods for those nations are allowed to be consumed there. But while doing that, we also have to comply with their regulations in terms of, say, the pesticide value or the heavy metal value for your food product might be a lot more stringent in a country like Japan than what would be in India. So we set it as an example that let's just make sure that everything that we do is complying to Japanese standards. If that is doing, we are giving better than what Indian standards demand, but then that's actually good value created for the consumer, and that's better manufacturing for us. And the second big difference that we see there is that still we are a traditional food company. We make Indian products. So our products are consumed by the Indian population mostly. And it's only in countries like the US or the UK where Indians have been around for a very long time and the local population are exposed to Indian food, where our products make it to the supermarkets there. Otherwise, we are sold mostly on e-commerce or into the Indian stores there. Okay. So what challenge lies before us is that how do we jump from being an Indian store brand to a supermarket brand there? And once we do that, that is when the next round of growth will start happening.
Yeah, that's true. But I'm glad you started exporting it to the US, because I still remember when I was a small child, my mother used to pack a lot of Chitre Bandhu packets and send it with the airlines.
Correct.
And give it to our relatives there, in fact. There was another question which came up to my mind. Did you find any marketing challenges or taste challenges in different states in India?
We do find that. And what we've seen is that one would be that marketing, what exactly do you want to market? Because the per capita consumption ratio in multiple states in India is very different. So as we were speaking just before this, that India is, I would say it's similar to what Europe would be, where there is a Eastern Europe, there is a Western Europe, there is a Southern Europe, and the demographics change and the capita consumption also changes, and the ability to buy a product also changes. So while a person in a metro city in India will not consider giving a 100 rupee note, people will be a lot more conscious about spending that in a tier 2 city. So how do you appeal to multiple demographies like that and actually keep having your avenue wide enough where the lowest economic spectrum also buys your product and also the affluent class buys your product? And what we've realized now is that you can't have a one size fits all approach, and you would rather just break it down into different target groups and deliver different values, because their expectations from the product for that 10 rupee or 100 rupees is very different. And that has now actually started helping us, because till then we would struggle in certain states and we would do very well in certain states. So we are working on it and it's delivering result, but I would say it's a little too early to say whether it's successful or not. It's delivering results is where we are at this moment.
Okay. But do you find any challenges where taste is concerned? Because every state, as you were talking previously, every 100 miles people prefer different tastes. And how do you plan to
So
make your
we
product
do have
adaptable to?
certain products where there are different variants that we do for different parts of the country. So a product like moong dal halwa, which is packaged, but people in the north will prefer the moong dal halwa to be oozing with ghee. And unless and until you can see a layer of ghee or fat at the top, it's not nutritious enough for the people in the north. But if you sell that same product in Bangalore or Chennai, people are going to be like, oh, that's too fatty food. I probably don't want that to be that fatty. I wanted something drier. So that's why we just do separate SKUs and sell it in different markets at times.
Okay.
So
There's this
locally
new
we have to
brand
adopt.
which I heard about, Binge Bar. How did that come up? What was the
So
reason?
we were trying to see how we could actually get into the 10 rupee category product, because that is the most consumed commodity in India. That is the 10 rupee, 20 rupee price zone.
Right.
And what we've set as a target, ambitious target for us, is that we want to reach our product into 1 million stores. So if you want to reach into 1 million stores, not everybody is going to pay 50 rupees to buy our product, because there are certain parts of the country who don't know our brand yet. So for them to make a transaction, we need to bring our purchase price down, or the entry price into the brand should be affordable enough for all parts of the country. That is where 10 rupees is not a bother anymore. But then while doing that, if you were just to do copycat products like what few of our competitors are doing, where it could either be a 5 rupee biscuit or a 10 rupee namkeen packet,
Right.
we would be just a Me Too product, and there's no value to be created there. So how could we disrupt something about that is where Binge Bar as an idea came. And what we saw was that eating a bar was a cool thing. It was a very urban thing though. But it was a cool thing. So we were used to eating nutritious or healthy bars or sweet chewy bars. Nobody had thought of doing namkeen bars, and we thought that that is a good market to work upon. So we started work on this in 2016, and it's actually in 2020 that we had the product ready, but then the pandemic struck. So we waited for a year for market to open, because people are not used to consuming that. So now it's only after a lot of sampling and actually explaining to people what the product is that where the habit forming is happening. And with food products, it's purely about creating a habit.
Okay.
So if you have a habit, people will keep coming again. And when the customer comes back again, that is where actually you create value. Because the first time sale probably adds to your turnover, but it's not going to be a repeat customer. So you want to have customer coming back again each and every time and asking for the same product.
True.
And that is what we are trying to do with Binge Bar.
So I'm sure you're getting a very positive response.
Yes, it's been rather encouraging. So we are in process of expanding capacity, where by the end of this year, we will be doing close to 1,200 bars a minute.
Okay.
So it's going to be pretty big capacity, and we aim to just be national by then in terms of the sales network developed together.
Okay, that's wonderful. I heard that you're also an angel investor. So could you
Yes.
tell us some more about it?
So what we realized is that as a family, the pace of disruption that is happening around us is much faster. And as a fourth generation business, sometimes we can not be the most agile in terms of responding to how markets are changing or dynamics are changing. And that's why we as a family office thought that we should be exposed to what new sectors are coming into and how they are disrupting and how we can make use of the network effect that is being done. And especially now with the advent of Web 3.0, where the big tech is also going to be threatened by the presence of it, and you actually have a channel which is open to everybody to come in, and you can just plug and play whatever you want to do. These new companies that are actually creating value are going to be in much demand by the end of this decade. So what we've been trying to see is that as an angel investor, can we be exposed to technologies that are going to disrupt in the time to come, and actually use these databases and these access and these overall captive user bases to make a targeted approach towards our product. So we invested into a sports company because we are wanting to make, so with our M Square brand, we are making nutritious products, we are making healthy products, we are making products that are good for people who are on strict diets and who want to have some physical gains coming out from the food that they are consuming. So when we invest into a sports company, we have direct access to that data. So we know who are the people consuming that, and these are the trendsetters who actually become influencers for us.
Right.
Or we are invested into a HR company, we've been invested into a e-commerce company.
Right.
So that way these exposures help us reach captive audiences with fixed goals, and also plug and play our larger ecosystem into these narrow ecosystems, where that plug and play model actually helps us reach a captive audience, and that conversion or early advantage is what we want to try and reap as a family.
We at Dr. D.Y. Patil Vidyapeeth, we also have an innovation and incubation center.
Wonderful.
Where we promote a lot of startups for our MBA students as well. And I'm sure if there is a good innovative idea, you would be keen to
I'll be
invest
glad
or
to.
at least listen to our students and their ideas.
So I think I'm a big fan of listening, because the kind of exposure and the confidence that students of today have compared to when, say, I was a student, it's stellar.
Right.
And I'm always amazed at how the change in a decade has changed the way people are looking at as a society towards entrepreneurship.
Right.
So when I was in college doing my engineering, 90% of the people in my batch were aiming to get hired or work in a company. Now I see that at least 50% of the students want to be entrepreneurs or do a startup.
True.
And they are not bothered about failure anymore, which is excellent, or I would say that's a great step as a society that we've made. So when they are not hindered by boundaries or the idea of failure,
That's true.
that is where the innovation is actually going to come. And they are much faster than us and smarter than me, I guess. So I am all open to listening to them and learning from them as well.
Well, that's wonderful. That's wonderful. Because at at DPU COL, that is the Center for Online Learning, we also offer an online MBA, which is UGC approved and AICT approved degree course.
Oh.
So, how do you think future managers can leverage this new online mode of education in companies like yours?
So I was fortunate enough to discuss this idea very recently with a spiritual person.
Oh.
And the concern was that we are also a large scale employer of people, and we have the Gen Z and Gen Y, and I don't know what next is going to come, but the motivation levels for these younger population is very different. So unlike in my grandfather's time, where a person would get employed or get associated with an organization, they would retire from it because they were seeking stability. In our parents' generation, probably they were seeking stability with some satisfaction. In today's generation, I think satisfaction is more important than stability. So people will probably quit a high-paying job but do something that they are passionate about, but make sure that whatever that satisfaction is that they are seeking comes, rather than the financial or the economic stability that comes around it. So motivating all of this is going to be a challenging part. And as managers or MBA graduates, how do you retain or keep this type of workforce aligned to your organization's goal is going to be the big challenge. So it can be as a manager in an organization or a manager in your own business where you are just inspiring people. So that way we have to keep giving a lot more. We have to keep oozing that value system of our company a lot more, and we have to probably be a lot more empathetic towards what's happening around us, because if that connect is there, then people will do all sorts of things for your organization to be successful. But if it still retains the bureaucratic structure that probably I grew up in, I don't think so that's going to be sustainable for getting the right kind of talent in the time to come. So next generation of MBAs need to study this, that how do you build teams around you who are inspired by values and not just structure.
True. And I'm sure they'd like to join Chitrai Bandhu for this reason.
I'm hoping so. So
Yes.
I guess that's part of today's purpose, that whatever I speak should be appealing enough as well.
Absolutely. So this is another personal question. What motivates Indraneel Chitrai?
Well, I think the biggest motivation for me would be the fact that I am part of the 2% club in the world, where as family business, only 2% family businesses survive into the 4th generation. So that's a very, very niche thing to be in.
Absolutely, I totally agree with
And I think that would not have been possible had 3 generations not put in enough hard work into it. So when we inherited this, it's because a lot of people have put in a lot of energies into doing that. And now it's our job to carry this legacy and build something further out of it. So that itself is one of the biggest motivating factor, because say 4 generations ago, my great grandfather, it was a startup then. Today that's become a mature company.
True.
So I can't imagine what kind of the gut feeling that he must be having in doing a startup of this sector at that time, when we were not even independent as a country. So if they could do it then, we have to do it now. That is the inspiration for me.
That's wonderful. So what is your vision for Chitrai Bandhu in the coming decade then?
So we want to be one of the biggest food companies in the world. And what we want to do is that we want to make food that is actually adding value to our consumers. So that's why what our target has been is that what we see or what I see is that on an average every person has 6 meals in a day. So from your breakfast to your post dinner dessert, there are about 6 meals.
Right.
So we want to make sure that of every meal there is either a Chitaya product or a Chitaya ingredient in that meal around the world, and that is the aim that we've set. That we have to be producing food that can be something's ingredient or something as a final product, but for every food consumed there should be something Chitaya that is inside it.
Wonderful. I wish Chitaya Bandhu all the best for this vision
Thank
of
you.
yours, and hope you'll succeed soon.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for this wonderful interview.
It's a pleasure.
Thank you. So, learners, with this interaction with Indraneel Chitre sir, we've realized how important it is to have knowledge of different subjects like marketing, international business, finance, project management. It is very important that we have the subject knowledge of these subjects while we grow our business, because we might get an opportunity in any of these fields to grow. So, I'll see you next time during the next Brainwave series. Thank you for listening to Indraneel Chitre, and let's learn together.